So, last week, many of us have experienced the ashfall. Some may call it microscopic glass or frozen lava or whatever those are. We have all experienced the ashfall here in Metro Manila, and some of the cars had them. Actually, we had dinner in Blake's in Katipunan, and Josh's car had some ashes there. But I mean, these are nothing compared to what Batangas, what Tagaytay, or Cavite have all experienced. We know that they are, of course, near Taal volcano. So the damage there, of course, agriculturally, is more severe. Now, unfortunately, this happened on a Sunday. A day when most people would like to just take their rest. Most people would just stay in their homes because it's a Sunday. It's a rest day. But as Christians, we should look at Sunday differently. We look at it not as a day of rest in a sense that we will stay in our homes and watch Netflix and eat pizza. It's not even our day. It's not even family day. It's the Lord's day. So today, we're going to study, I think, our most favorite topic, which is Sabbath, the Lord's Day. How it is an actual biblical Sabbath. And we're going to study its perpetuity and why it is designed for worship. And when we say perpetuity, it means the state of lasting forever. Kumbaga, parang hindi siya natapos. Hanggang ngayon, it's still effective. So in our study, it means that there is still a principle that is to be observed. That the Sabbath-keeping principle did not go away when the Old Covenant went away. So in order for us to understand the perpetuity of Sabbath, we should go back then to the creation, to those days of creation, and understand the ordinance or the fundamental principles that were instituted by God from that time, from creation, that up until now governs human life. Okay? So these principles are engraved in the very essence of man from creation. From creation, first, it is the principle of authority. Now, by just reading Genesis 1 to 3, you would notice that there is a structure of authority that exists in the ordering of human society. We see God Himself giving blessings, God Himself be giving law to Adam and Eve, and that is a sign of authority. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, God, it says, and God blessed them. So see, God blessed them. Also, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So God is giving a law. Bibigay siya ng command, ng batas kay Adam na kailangan niyang gawin. So again, it is a picture of authority. So there is a principle of authority that up until now governs human life. It perpetuates up until now. Also, you see, that's God over His creations, but also there is man's authority over women, over Adam, over Eve. And we can see that in Genesis chapter 2, verse 23. Then the man said, Adam said, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and shall be called woman. Now Adam, the man, naming or giving name to his would-be wife is a sign of authority. It is an exercise of authority as well. Pero pa, human beings are ruling over the animals. And we see that in Genesis 1:26. God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens and earth. So see, there is a principle of authority from God to His creations, from man over woman, from human beings to animals. Okay? Now, this principle of authority perpetuates, again, it still is effective until now, it's still present up until now, of course, even to the New Testament. And our case for that is when Paul appealed to the creation design for the male headship in marriage. When Paul was explaining the authority of man over his wife, he went back to the creation story. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 8 to 10. So if you have your Bibles with you. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels, and man having authority over his wife. So we see that Paul going back to the creation ordinance, and also Paul going back as well to the creation story when he was describing the authority of men over in the church. And that women should not have that authority over women, over men in the church. So again, in family and even church, Paul went back to the creation ordinance. So 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 13, Paul says, let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Now, what example did he write? Sabi niya rito, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. So you see, the principle of authority perpetuates up until the New Testament. Secondly, there is this principle of community. Now, there's a need for an ability to build communities that are inherent to man as a relational being. We have been created for relationships. And that is a principle that up until now perpetuates. So, we see that in the creation story when God said, it is not good for man to be alone. Now, that is not just a marriage verse. It talks about all human relationships. Okay? So a case for its perpetuity is that in the New Testament, when Christ resurrected, when Christ, before He ascended, He established the church as a community. So He has established this community of believers because this principle of community, this need for us to be in relationships is, of course, evident. It's still, up until now, it perpetuates. So there is the principle of community. Third, there is a principle of work. Now it is wrong to say that when Adam and Eve fell, when they sinned, then that's the time they were asked to work. No, they have been asked to work even before the fall. Adam was asked to work and to toil. So, but the curse of the fall is the unproductive toil. Because before the fall, there's produce, they're really productive ang work nila. But because of sin, there becomes an unproductive toil. So see, the principle of work is still there. Of course, in the New Testament, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. So it's obvious, right? Fourth, there is a principle of Sabbath. Okay? Now wait, di ba? Sabbath only existed, it began when God gave the law to Moses? We're saying no, because it has already existed even before the fall. Okay? So a 6-day work and 1-day rest dictate the proportion of man's weekly routine. And remember, when Moses was explaining the law to Israel, he went back to creation. That you have this as a law to follow because God Himself rested on the seventh day. So it is a principle that began even in creation that up until now in the New Testament perpetuates. Okay? Even in Mark chapter 2 verse 27, the Sabbath is affirmed as God's institution for man. When Christ said the Sabbath was made for man, not made for the Sabbath, He was actually rebuking the Pharisees who was given man-made laws Now, that they thought of Sabbath as a tiring ordinance, a tiring law. But really, it's not. It's not supposed to be that way. Later on, I will explain. So again, the principle of Sabbath began in creation and up until now perpetuates. So now we have established that Sabbath is a principle that goes back from creation, but also that the law was clearly given to people to have it as a command to actually keep it in the time of Moses, where he received the tablets of stone. And these are not the exact tablets of stone, just a picture of it. In fact, the first tablet just consists of the first four. Yung second tablet, 6 talaga yun. Okay? So, the law existed even before the fall. Okay? The law existed even before Moses showing the tablets of stone to Israel. What God did is He just wrote the law. He just wrote the law on the tablets of stone, and that's it. It doesn't mean that the law has not been existing even since. Okay? And we know that, because even before the laws were put into tablets of stone, they were already binding mandates. I mean, Cain murdering his brother Abel, right, in Genesis chapter 4. And the story of Joseph and the wife of Potiphar. So we're saying that the Ten Commandments, or the law of God, is still there from the creation account up until now. Why? What stopped from the covenant of Moses with God? Those that stopped were the judicial laws. Yung hayop mo, pinatay yung hayop ko, kailangan papatayin yun. Yung mga ganong klaseng judicial laws. Ceremonial laws. Those are 8-day-old babies are required to be circumcised. Those are the ceremonial laws, and the killing or the sacrificial lambs, that sacrament, are all abrogated or stopped when Christ died on the cross. But the Ten Commandments, or what we call the moral law, existed even before the fall of Adam and Eve, up until now, perpetuates. Why? Because the moral law represents the character of God. That He is a holy God. What God did is He wrote the laws so that we will know what those are specifically. And that's the only reason why it's there. Now, the moral law of God perpetuates. Why? Because that alone was written by the finger of God. That alone was put into the Ark of Covenant, yung malaking box where also the staff of Aaron was. And that alone was the standard by which all nations are being judged. But there are those who say, okay, let's say that the Ten Commandments up until now is present and it still is perpetuating, but all of these except for one command, which is number 4. Ano ba yung number 4? Let's look at it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now you would understand why many churches have not really, do not have this as a conviction. Na it's okay to not worship on Sundays because of that idea that all the 9 commandments are perpetuating up until now are present and being effective, except for the Sabbath. So that's the question. Did Christ really abolish the Ten Commandments? I thought He only abolished the judicial law, the ceremonial law. So it actually includes even the Sabbath, the 4th commandment. Just one commandment over all among the 10 commandments. So that's what people are saying, and what our response to that is the promise of the new covenant is the writing of the law of God on the hearts of His people. And we see that in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31, when God will make a new covenant. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. So see, the law in the old covenant, or the covenant with Israel, the law of God was written on tablets of stone. But in the new covenant that God will make, it's not going to be on stones anymore. It's going to be on the hearts of God's people. And before the night before Christ died, in His last supper with His disciples, with His apostles, He repeated the same language. What He said was, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. So He was talking about His death, His blood is that sign of that new covenant. It is a sign also that the old covenant has been abrogated, is no more. So what is new in the New Testament then is the medium of writing and not the content written. The content is still there. If you say that, okay, as Christians, the law of God is in my heart, are you saying that only the 9 laws are in my heart, not the Sabbath? When Jeremiah was talking about God putting the law in the people's hearts, he was talking about the 10 commandments, the moral law of God. And so, the 10 commandments under the New Testament remains the standard of Christian holiness, accompanied by, of course, God's grace. So if they say that the 4th commandment has been removed, ang counter-argument natin is, why should the 4th commandment be removed if the other 9 are retained? We can say that. Secondly, our response to these claims, the New Testament teaching on the law lean on its perpetuity, not abolition. There is no explicit verse in the New Testament that says, the Sabbath law, the 4th commandment, has been abrogated, has been removed. There is none. In fact, those people who say that the 4th commandment was removed from the New Testament only are saying, and this is their defense, is that when Christ was teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, He repeated all the laws except for one, Sabbath. But that does not mean that the Sabbath does not perpetuate. That is not enough defense for us to say, because there are verses that implies, and later on I will show it to you. So again, but we say, in fact, God or Jesus Christ made a positive aspect of the law. Imagine, the 10 commandments are negative. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Christ shortened it positively by saying, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your mind. Because if you love the Lord your God, you will not create any images and worship it. You will not set aside any other time to worship God. So, again, and secondly, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, pointing to the second half of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie. So see, the positive and negative. This does not say that the 4th commandment has been removed. Third, there are possible New Testament explicit reiteration of the 4th commandment. It says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9, so then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And that is a New Testament text. And the author of Hebrews is actually comparing the Sabbath rest to our eternal rest. That after all this work on earth, there is that Sabbath rest, eternal rest with Christ in the future. And he was comparing that to Sabbath. to the Sabbath of Moses and Israel, and also to the Sabbath of the creation. Which simply means that the Sabbath at that time is still being kept holy during the time of the author of Hebrews. And also, Paul, when he wrote a letter to Timothy, he was giving him some violations of the law. It says, now we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners. Now, ungodly, sinners, lawless, disobedient, those are descriptions of those hostile to God, which is a violation of the first to third commandment. And the unholy and profane as a word often used in violation of the Sabbath. You're profaning the table of the Lord. You're profaning the sacrificial system of the Lord. And you know the rest. Homosexuality, murderers, they all point to the commandments. Those are violations. And so my proposition is this. The Sabbath, as the fourth commandment, is part of the unchanging moral standard of God for human life. So, the moral law still exists. All 10 of them. It remains a law then. Which, isa na ibig sabihin nito? Simply means that Sabbath keeping remains a law. And any transgressions of the law is a violation and is a sin. So now we have established that the principle of Sabbath traces back from the creation, as it is a creation principle or creation ordinance. Then we found that it is part also of the Ten Commandments. God giving Moses to Israel the Ten Commandments, and that the Ten Commandments is a picture of the holiness of God, meaning it has been present as a law, and it perpetuates up until the New Testament, and that includes the fourth commandment, keeping the Sabbath holy. So we have established that. If it is established that the fourth commandment is an unchanging principle for man, the next inquiry is related to the appointed day of its observance. What day should we keep the Sabbath holy? When should we observe the Sabbath under the New Covenant? Now, in the Old Covenant, if you check Exodus chapter 20, which we have read a while ago, and also in Deuteronomy 5, both talks about the Sabbath being in the seventh day. Again, Moses pointing back to the creation when God Himself created everything from day 1 to day 6, and on the seventh day He rested. That does not mean that naumupo si God or He sat down and napagod siya. It doesn't mean that. Rest, meaning He just ceased working. He just ceased creating, Okay? So the common misconception is that if the Sabbath principle perpetuates, it must be observed then on the seventh day. Now remember, in the Old Covenant, when Israel was keeping the Sabbath holy, they were doing it on the Sabbath day, which is from Friday night to Saturday night. That's Friday 6 p.m. to Saturday 6 p.m. Now actually, you're telling us that the Sabbath still is a law up until now. Does that mean then that we should be doing this on Saturday? I can't do it. I have something else. May mga lakad ako, yung pwede. The Ten Commandments did not state a specific day. The Ten Commandments did not state a specific day, a Monday, a Tuesday. It just says first day to sixth day. And on the seventh day, you have your Sabbath. So again, it did not state a specific day when should the Sabbath be observed, and nor what ceremonies included in it. The principle is really, it's not the sequence from the first day to the sixth day or to the seventh day, but the proportions. 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day, you keep Sabbath. You rest. Intindihan niyo? So the point is, the Sabbath principle is the proportion of a day of rest with 6 days of labor. Now actually, does that mean na mali yung ginagawa ng Old Covenant before, that Saturday? No, that's not wrong. Because if that that's wrong. I mean, you know how when God becomes angry, when there's a law that is being transgressed, right? So it's not wrong during their time. They understood it as it was pointing to the creation ordinance, the creation principle that God rested on the seventh day, and Saturday is the seventh day. So that is fine. Okay? But all I'm saying is, there is not a specific law in the moral law, in the Ten Commandments, where it says, you do it on Saturday, you do it on Sunday. It just says, work on 6 days, and then rest on the seventh day. Okay? So again, my proposition then is, the appointed day in the New Testament for Sabbath in the New Testament is the first day. Now I will explain why. Why the first day, which is Sunday, is now the biblical Sabbath. First, there is an anticipation of the Old Testament significance of the 8th day. There are a lot. In Leviticus chapter 22, verse 27, even in the law of Moses, some of the systems there points to the 8th day. 8th day, by the way, is first day, right? 7th day is Saturday, 8th day is Sunday, right? So first day, 8th day is the same. So in Leviticus chapter 22, verse 27, it says, when an ox or sheep or goat is born, it shall remain 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day on it shall be acceptable as a food offering. See the picture of that. The offering is accepted on the 8th day. So there are anticipations of the Old Testament that is significant to the Sunday. Secondly, there is the consecration of the high priest. In Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he consecrated them. He blessed them on the 8th day. There's also the cleansing system. Lulugas sila on the 8th day. The Feast of Tabernacles on the 8th day as well. And the offerings. Secondly, the resurrection of, and most importantly, why we meet on Sundays and why the first day becomes, why the Sabbath becomes a Sunday is because of this. The resurrection of Christ happened on the first day. Now, remember, when Moses was giving his commands to keep the Sabbath holy, he was pointing to the creation story. The creation story is the culminating event of the Old Testament, of God's rest. Let's look at Exodus chapter 20. We read this a while ago. Remember the Sabbath day? For in 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. The reason why Israel has been worshiping and keeping the Sabbath holy on a Saturday, the seventh day, is because of this. Because they patterned it from the creation story. Because God Himself rested. Now, let's go to the New Testament. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 15 to 17. And He died for all those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for Him who for their sake died and was raised. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard Him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, a new creation. It is original Greek. Walang he is a. So therefore, if anyone is in Christ, a new creation. This is what we are pointing to. If the Jewish Sabbath, the seventh day, is patterned from the old creation account, where God rested on the seventh day, the Christian Sabbath, the first day, is patterned from the new creation account, when He resurrected from the dead, where Jesus Christ resurrected on the first day. Okay? Third, there are also significant events in the early church happened on the first day. The appearances of Christ with Martha Mary. That's on the first day. He also appeared with, he also had an appearance those two disciples in Emmaus, first day as well. Okay? And also the outpouring of the Spirit on Pentecost. Fourth, there are examples and directives of the apostles. In Acts chapter 20, verse 7, there is a church gathering and breaking of the bread. Acts chapter 20, sabi, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. And also, Paul asked that in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do on the first day of every week. So Paul, giving directions to the churches of Galatia to collect money. Meaning, there is an implication that these people meets every first day of the week. And the collection of money happens on that day. And so now, we have established that the Sabbath principle can be dated back from creation. And when God gave the written law to Moses, He specifically patterned it to His rest in the old creation. And so the Israelites at that time kept the Sabbath or Saturday holy. And now that Jesus has removed or abrogated or abolished the civil law, the ceremonial law, the Saturday observation also has been abrogated. And so for us Christians, since Sabbath is part of the Ten Commandments, part of the moral law, which perpetuates, then that means we are to keep the Sabbath holy. And we have established as well that the 8th day or the first day, which is Sunday, is our Sabbath. Because it represents the new creation, the resurrection day of Jesus Christ. We're not pointing back to the old creation anymore. We're pointing to the new creation, which Christ Himself started when He resurrected. Now the question is, last question ito, what do we do during Sabbath? We have established those fruits already. What do we do then during Sabbath? Is it an actual rest? Pahinga? Yung ba yung ibig sabihin nun? Is Sabbath really rest? Do I just stay home and lie on bed all day? Or is it worship? Now first, there are 5 reasons why Sabbath is designed for worship. Let's look at the situation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The situation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished His work that He had done, and He rested on the 7th day from all His work that He had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all His work that He had done in creation. First, the situation in the garden implies that the Sabbath was designed for worship and communion with God. The Sabbath was blessed by God. It was sanctified by God, meaning God Himself made it holy. Take note that He did not, take note, by the way, that God Himself did not bless the 6th day. God Himself did not bless the 5th day. The only things that He blessed on Genesis 1 is Adam and Eve and the living creatures. But then when it comes to days, He blessed the last day, the 7th day. No other days were blessed in the Genesis account. And the Sabbath was given to Adam and Eve, again, as we have been saying a while ago, prior to the fall. Before the fall. So when God Himself gave Sabbath to Adam and Eve, it wasn't pointing to any redemption. It wasn't pointing to any salvation. It wasn't a symbol signifying Jesus Christ as a Redeemer. Parang yung arko ni Noah represents salvation. But the Sabbath isn't pointing to that. It wasn't given as a symbol. Since there was no sin, there was no death yet to be redeemed from. It wasn't given as a symbol of salvation. Of course, at that time, which would be irrelevant because Adam and Eve was not fallen yet. So, also in John chapter 5, verse 17, Christ said, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." So He says that God is working. He doesn't rest. Hindi siya nagpapahinga. Hindi ito yung 7th day na that He rested and He stopped working. He ceased creating. That's what it means. So Sabbath should not then be equated with inactivity. Inactivity. Just like how we should imitate God's rest. And so on the seventh day, God stopped creating, and of course we don't know how long after, how many days after when Adam and Eve actually sinned. We don't know that. We can't be too dogmatic about that. We can't say on that seventh day din sila nagkasala, or probably how many days from the time of rest. And so, all we know is starting on the seventh day, there was no further creation. There was communion with God, and we have seen that in Genesis chapter 3. And Adam and Eve can actually hear God. Right? So they have that intimate communion and relationship, which implies worship. Sabi ni Robert Raymond, rest cannot mean mere cessation or stoppage from labor, much less recovery from fatigue. Of course, God did not get tired. Rest then means involvement in new, in a sense of different activity. It means cessation of the labor of the 6 days and the taking up of different labors appropriate to the Lord's day. What these labors of the Sabbath rest are is circumscribed by the accompanying phrase, to the Lord. They certainly include both corporate and private acts of worship and the contemplation of the glory of God. Now, it's wrong also to say that since we are created to live a life to the glory of God, that we are to be living sacrifices, that is our spiritual worship, is sabi ni Paul in Romans chapter 12. It's wrong to say that, okay, since we are to do that, then let's make every day a Sabbath day. Right? Since we are to worship God in everything that we do, whatever we drink, then we should have it on our minds. I mean, that is true in that sense. But we're saying that Sabbath is different than that. There is a specific type of worship. John Murray says, while it is true that we ought to serve the Lord every day, and in all things we must not forget that there are different ways of serving God, we do not serve Him by doing the same thing all the time. If we do that, we are either insane or notoriously perverse. There is a great variety in human vocation. If we neglect to observe that variation, we shall soon pay the cost. Sabbath is a day set apart. Which simply means that we should engage in labor for 6 days. And labor for the glory of God. Do your best in your jobs or whatever you do. Father, whatever work you have. Do everything for the Lord. But when the seventh day comes, or the Sabbath day comes, the first day, and that's a different thing. Right? Ibang worship ito. Right? This is a set of worship activities that God Himself regulated, that He has given us. Secondly, God sanctified the Sabbath. The fact that God sanctified the Sabbath means He set this apart from other days. Now, in Leviticus chapter 27, if you go there, we have people, we have animals, various objects, or even offerings that were dedicated as holy to the Lord. And these people, these objects were dedicated to the service of the tabernacle. Okay? And were used in the worship and service of the Lord exclusively. And so when God sanctified the Sabbath and made it holy, He set it apart for worship exclusively. In Leviticus chapter 27, there are just normal objects there that were set apart because they are to be used for worship. Now, all the more that God has set apart a day which is for worship. Third, and by the way, also in Numbers chapter 16. Numbers chapter 16, we have the case of Korah. I don't know if you know that story. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, where they asserted that umampi na sila kay Moses. They said that all congregation is holy. Everyone is holy. And that Moses and the rest of the leaders were exalting themselves. Then what happened to them? The ground ate them all up. So that's not true. Not everyone there was specifically made holy or blessed by God. There are things that were blessed by God specifically for worship use. And third, the commandment's position among the 10 commandments. Now, the position of the fourth commandment in the 10 commandments points to an emphasis upon worship. Now, I believe we all know this, that the first 4 commandments pertain to our relationship with God. Right? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and the rest is our service to God by way of serving our neighbor. Right? And these 2 parts point to the positive aspect of the law. The first part where it says, love the Lord your God with all your might, with all your soul, with all your heart. And second part is love your neighbor as yourself. So you can divide that into 2. But also, looking at those commandments specific to God, for God, when God is to be worshipped. So see, the first commandment is the object of worship. Who is God? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The object of your worship should only be God alone. The manner of worship, the second. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. 3. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Our proper attitude of worship. And 4, when? God gives us the time, the day that has been set apart for worship. Now, the grossest evidence I have seen that the church has moved away from understanding the Sabbath as a day of worship. It's a sermon that I found before. I'm not going to name the church or even the preacher. It's way back before. You probably have not heard of the church. The title of the sermon is this: Let's celebrate Sabbath. Take a rest. You deserve it. So it's a manipulation of the idea of Sabbath, thinking that Sabbath is something that we deserve. From working for 6 days, you deserve to rest on the 7th day, and that is your Sabbath. But really, Sabbath is for the Lord. It is for worshiping God. Let us not misunderstand Mark chapter 2, verse 27, when Christ says, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. What was happening there, Christ was explaining that man was created first, 6th day, before the actual Sabbath, which is the 7th day. So after creating man, He instituted the Sabbath for him to benefit from its holy rest. Jesus was not abolishing the Sabbath when He said that, for He called it a creation ordinance, but He didn't oppose. He said that because He was opposing the Pharisaic man-made legalism. But Sabbath was made for man, which simply is the ordinance of Sabbath. The worship is for man to use the Sabbath for worshiping God. Yet many contemporary churches or Christians have abused this principle in order to shift from a worship-centered to a man-centered view of the Sabbath. Imagine God giving a law for you to rest. Just imagine that. Anyway, fourth. Right? Fourth, character of the commands to keep the Sabbath. Now, there are varied duties explicitly connected to Sabbath observance. It says in Leviticus chapter 23, see, we will know here that in the Old Covenant, their Sabbath is a time of worship. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest. A holy convocation or a gathering. Now, in fact, even today, when you go to Israel, Sabbath is something that they are keeping holy from Friday night to Saturday night. Of course, with Israel, they have added a lot of man-made rules, right? But look at it that way. Yung tingin nila sa Sabbath is that that they've added many man-made rules because they want it, they understand it to be a day of worshiping God. And their idea of not working or ceasing from work can mean a lot of things. Of course, they have over-exaggerated on things. When I was there, I was walking in the Jerusalem road. Tinawag ako ng isang Jewish person. He asked me, this was on a Friday night. I was walking papunta sa wall, sa Wailing Wall. So, tinawag ko ng Jew, he was calling me, and then pinapapasok ako sa bahay niya. I mean, of course, gulat na gulat ako kung papapasukin. So anyway, what he was asking me to do was for me to turn off their light. And that's it. Why? Because they look at it as a law. If they do it, then they are transgressing the law. I mean, they even have a Shabbat elevator wherein wala silang pipindutin. Every floor hihinto because they look at it as a work. Of course, they have exaggerated it. They have added a lot of man-made rules. But see that even them, they understood it as something that is, over zealous, something na worship day for them, right? Okay, and even in Psalm chapter 92, a song for the Sabbath is the title of that song. It is good to give thanks to the Lord, to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to declare your steadfast love in the morning and your faithfulness by night, to the music of the lute and the harp, for the melody of the lyre, for you, O Lord, have made me glad by your word. At the works of your hands I sing for you. So see, this is a song for the Sabbath, implying that this is what they do. Of course, add to that the priest dictating the law in front of the congregation. So there is a worship time for Israel, and that is the Sabbath day. Also in the New Testament, Acts chapter 20, verse 7, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together, what did they do? And we have discussed this last week. This is another terminology for the Lord's Supper. They broke bread. Another one in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, they collect money. Okay, so lastly, the connection of Sabbath to the hope of heaven. What is its connection to heaven? Now, the Sabbath is designed to be a type of heaven. And the biblical picture of heaven is a place. If you read Revelation chapter 4, Revelation chapter 5, John was seeing his vision, right? The biblical picture of heaven is a place of solely consumed with the worship of God through Jesus Christ. So we must not merely think of the Sabbath as looking forward to heaven, but we must regard the Sabbath as being patterned after heaven. Which means that what we're doing now should be a pattern of that. If we go to Revelation chapter 1 verse 10, before John was brought to his vision, it tells us that during the Lord's day, John received a vision from the Lord Jesus Christ. And what did he see? He saw worship. So there is the only place in the New Testament where we are even given a glimpse of heaven revealing glorified saints and angels bowing before God who sits upon the throne. It's in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. So, since it is the hope of heaven, then the term rest really is a rest from our worldly employments, even recreations, so that we might have a day of worship and communion with God. That is what the Westminster Shorter Catechism said. The Sabbath is to be sanctified by a holy resting all that day, even from such worldly employments and recreations as are lawful on other days, and taking up the whole time in the public and private exercises of God's worship, except so much as it is to be taken up in the works of necessity and mercy. Now, necessity means here, this is the frequent question asked. What are the exceptions? What are the exceptions there? We see the story of Christ in Matthew chapter 12, verses 11 to 12. He said to them, "Which one of you who has a sheep, if the sheep falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out?" It's Sabbath, I can't do that right now. I mean, ganun ba yung thinking natin? This is the exception that the framers of this catechism is saying. Works of necessity and mercy. Now, if whatever you're doing on the Lord's Day or on Sunday, can it be moved on Saturday or on Monday? That's the question. So, ask yourself, right? Works of necessity yun. It's the same thing na sinabi ni Christ on John chapter 7, verse 23. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? See, works of necessity, works of mercy. But the question should not be whether or not it is lawful, for instance, to take a walk with a child on the Lord's Day and not attend the worship, whatever you're gonna do. But whether or not at all that we do on the Sabbath is designed specifically and intentionally to promote corporate, family, and private worship. So if we are truly consumed with the glories of redemption, with the spiritual blessings that are given to us by God the Father, by virtue of the death of His Son, through the intercession and the work of the Holy Spirit, then we would not likely define what is lawful on the day in terms of what we think is restful. If we were more consumed with the love of Christ and grateful worship to God, it is likely that most of the activities that become the subject of debate on the Sabbath would become virtually, for us, irrelevant. Sabi ni Anonymous, he who understands in what the sanctification of the Sabbath consists has no need that the sins in the fourth commandment should be pointed out to him. In Anonymous ko na lang. So the firm articulation of defense for the Christian Sabbath should be accompanied by a delightful weekly observance of it in the Lord's Day. And that ends our topic this afternoon. Our topic next week is the qualifications for diaconate.